My nephew Bright said it so casually that I almost didn't catch what he meant. I was standing in my own living room, the one I bought 30 years ago with my own money, when he dropped those words on me like a bomb. My sister was visiting with her children, and we were having coffee. Everything seemed normal until Bright, her oldest son at 35, leaned against my bookshelf and looked at me differently. "You know, Aunt Mercy, at your age it's good you have us," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "People without children. Well, they're vulnerable. Lucky for you, we're stepping in." Froze. The cup paused halfway to my lips. My entire life, my successful career, my independence, my carefully built world, suddenly felt fragile in his words. He wasn't offering help. He was claiming ownership. And right there in that moment I realized something terrifying. My family had already started dividing my life among themselves. While I was still breathing. While I was still here. I forced a smile and changed the subject, but inside something shifted. A warning light flickered in my mind. What right did Bright think he had to speak about my future like he owned it? 3 days later, Bright came to my house alone. He didn't call first. He never did anymore. He had started using his own key, the one I gave him for emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. This was something worse. He found me reading in my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed without asking. Then he leaned close, his voice soft but ice-cold, and whispered words I'll never forget. "At your age, Mercy. People like you don't fight. You comply." I could feel my hands shaking. My heart started pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. He was talking about me like I was already gone. Like I was just a body waiting to become a signature on a document. Smiled. God help me, I smiled so he wouldn't see my fear. "I'm fine, Bright. Really. I don't need." "That's not what I meant," he interrupted. His voice almost gentle. It was worse than if he'd shouted. "I just mean, you should let us help. Stop being so stubborn. It's not good for someone your age." After he left, I sat on my bed for 2 hours without moving. The worst part. Within days, everyone agreed with him. My friends started saying I should be more careful. My neighbors began watching me differently. Even my doctor started asking if I had family support. Bright had planted a seed, and it was growing everywhere. The phone calls stopped first. My sister used to call every Sunday. Then it became every other week. Then silence. When I called her, she was distant, busy, distracted. She mentioned that Bright had been worried about me. Then the visits started. But they weren't visits anymore. They were inspections. They would come over and walk through my house like they were evaluating it. They'd look at my furniture, my kitchen appliances, my bathroom fixtures. First I thought they were just being nosy. But then I realized they were cataloging everything. They were making a list. One afternoon my cousin Violet came by, and instead of asking how I was sleeping, she asked what I owned. Where were my bank statements? Did I have any investments? Life insurance? I answered some questions, deflected others. But inside I was piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to solve. This wasn't about caring for me. This was about calculating my worth. Later that night I sat in my study and wondered, who told them my private information? Which family member had been loose-tongued enough to discuss my financial situation? And more importantly, why did they suddenly care? It began small, then became a weapon. Not childless. That was old language, tired language. No, they started saying it differently. Poor Mercy. So alone. Mercy has no one to look after her. Mercy is alone in this world. They said it loudly, deliberately, in front of other people, at the grocery store, at church, at community events. They wanted everyone to know that I was isolated, that I was helpless, that I needed them. The word burned every time I heard it. Lone. Started reshaping how people saw me. Neighbors who used to wave now offered help getting groceries. Friends who used to enjoy my company now came with pity in their eyes. I wasn't Mercy anymore, the independent woman who had built her own life. I was poor, alone Mercy. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. This narrative was deliberate. It was being built piece by piece, like a prison constructed while I watched helplessly. That word, alone, was about to cost me everything. Everything I'd worked for. Everything I'd built. Everything that made me myself. I could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. It happened so smoothly that I almost didn't realize what he was doing. Bright arrived one evening with my sister, and they sat me down with serious expressions. They'd been talking, they said. They loved me, they said. And they were worried about my safety. What if you fall? Bright asked. What if you forget to lock the doors? My sister added. So we think it's better if we have access, Bright concluded. Just in case you need us quickly. I tried to protest, but they looked at me with such concern that I sounded paranoid. So I gave them my keys. Both sets. For a week I didn't think much about it. Then one afternoon I wanted to go to the grocery store. I reached for my keys and they weren't in their usual spot. I searched everywhere. Finally I called Bright. I'm protecting you, he said when he came over. His voice was patient, like he was talking to a child. I have the keys now. I'll come pick you up whenever you need to go somewhere. That night, I stood at my own front door and realized something that chilled my blood. I couldn't enter my own house without permission. I was a prisoner in my own home. Not by bars or locks, but by something far more dangerous. Trust that had been weaponized. Protection from who? I wondered. Or was it protection from myself? From my ability to leave? To escape? Bright told everyone I was forgetful. He told his mother. His mother told her book club. Her book club told the entire church. By Wednesday, people I'd known for 20 years were treating me like I was losing my mind. The worst part. I didn't know what lies he'd specifically told them. But I could see the effect everywhere. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson stopped asking me for recipes she knew I could make perfectly. My doctor's nurse started speaking louder and slower, like I was hard of hearing or simple-minded. People would watch me when I spoke, really watch me like they expected me to collapse mid-sentence. They'd exchange glances with each other. Silent conversations happening right in front of me. By Friday I went to the library and the librarian, a woman I'd been friends with for years, suggested I get an audiobook instead because reading might be too much strain. I was being slowly, publicly erased. And I understood exactly what was happening. Bright was preparing the ground. He was making everyone believe I was incompetent, unreliable, unsafe. Because that's what you do before you take control of someone's life. You plant seeds of doubt. You make people believe the person needs a guardian. They were laying the foundation for something bigger. Something final. I found out about the meeting by accident. I overheard my sister on the phone with Bright. They were discussing the property situation, and what happens when Mercy. Her voice trailed off when she realized I was in the room, but the damage was done. What property situation? I asked, my heart already racing. Nothing, Mercy. Just family business, she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. 3 days later I saw an email on the family group chat. It was about a meeting at Bright's office. About my estate. About who would inherit what and when. And I realized something that made me want to scream. I hadn't been invited. They had made plans about my future. My house, my money, my life without asking me. Without including me. Without even telling me it was happening. I was still alive. Still breathing. Still completely capable of making my own decisions. Yet I was already erased from the conversation about my own life. When I called my sister to confront her, she got defensive. We were just trying to help plan for the future, Mercy. You don't have kids. Someone has to think about these things. But that wasn't what this was. This was a coup. A carefully orchestrated takeover of everything I owned and everything I was. And the scariest part, they genuinely believed they had the right to do it. I discovered what Bright was doing by complete accident. I was cleaning out an old file drawer when I found paperwork from my property manager. It mentioned tenant payments. But I had sold that rental property 5 years ago. Confused, I dug deeper. That's when I found letters addressed to Bright. About the apartment building I actually still owned. The one that generated income every single month. Tenants were paying rent. To Bright. My nephew. My own money going into his account. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial his number. Bright, there are tenants paying rent to you. That's my property. That's my money. I heard him smile through the phone. That's the only way I can describe it. I heard his smile. Well, Aunt Mercy, someone has to manage it. You can't handle these things anymore. Who else would it go to after you? I'm just being prepared. After you. After you. Not if something happens to you. Not in the future. But specifically, after you're gone. After you're dead. He was already calculating the time until I wasn't here anymore. And he was taking what was mine to prepare for that inevitable moment. That's when I understood. This wasn't about helping an elderly aunt. This was about waiting for me to die. And if I took too long, I think Bright might have been willing to speed the process along. Cried that night. Actually cried. I locked my bedroom door and wept silently. So silently that no one would hear. My hands covered my mouth to muffle any sound because I didn't want them to know how scared I was. I didn't want them to have that satisfaction. I wasn't crying because I was weak. God knows I wasn't weak. I was crying because I finally understood the plan. The complete, terrible picture of what was happening. They weren't waiting for me to die naturally. They weren't patiently sitting around hoping I'd pass quietly in my sleep. No. They were actively trying to push me aside. They were gathering evidence that I was incompetent, even though it was all lies. They were taking control of my assets piece by piece. They were isolating me from the people who cared about me. And when everything was in place, when I was completely alone and everyone believed I was mentally unfit, something would happen. An accident maybe. Suddenly gone very naturally. And so sad that there was nothing anyone could have done. They had been planning my erasure from the world. And it was working. I sat on my bed in the dark and realized I had to do something. Because no one else was going to save me. I had to save myself. The next morning, I made a decision that went against every instinct screaming inside me. I stopped resisting. I agreed when Bright suggested I see a neurologist. I nodded when my sister said I needed more help around the house. I thanked Bright when he offered to manage my appointments. I smiled when he talked about my future like it was his to plan. Became compliant. I became exactly what they wanted. A quiet, obedient old woman with no fight left in her. Bright relaxed immediately. His face softened. He actually patted my hand once, like I was a child who'd finally learned to behave. My sister seemed relieved, like she'd been holding tension in her shoulders that she could finally release. For the first time in weeks, they treated me with something resembling kindness. But inside I was calculating, planning, observing. Looking back, I'm still not entirely sure if this was a mistake or my opening. Maybe it was both. All I knew was that I had to change my strategy. Fighting them directly had only made them tighten their grip. So I would give them what they wanted. I would make them think they'd won. And that's when I would strike. Once Bright thought he had me under control, he changed completely. He spoke for me. In public, at the doctor's office, with the bank manager. I would start to answer a question, and he would interrupt with his own answer like I was a puppet and he held the strings. He signed documents with my name. At first, I thought he was forging my signature, but then I realized he was doing it right in front of me, and I was nodding like a confused old woman. I could see what he was doing, but I didn't stop him. He corrected people when they spoke to me directly, like I hadn't heard them properly. My old friend Tamara came by, and when she asked me about my garden, Bright interrupted. Aunt Mercy doesn't garden anymore. It's too much for her. But I had been tending that garden that very morning. I'd been planting new roses. Power changed him. It made him arrogant, careless, floppy. He started believing his own narrative so completely that he got comfortable. He didn't bother hiding things anymore. He left documents on my kitchen table. He talked on the phone about my finances while I was in the room like I was furniture. And he never noticed what I was noticing. Every careless moment. Every document. Every lie spoken out loud. Every overreach of his authority. I was seeing it all. Remembering it all. He had no idea that by becoming comfortable, he was walking directly into a trap. I started writing everything down. Not to hurt him. Not because I had some grand revenge plot brewing. I started collecting information because I was terrified and I needed to understand what was happening to me. Specific words he'd said. Witnesses who were present. Documents he'd signed. Money that had moved from my accounts to his. Lies he'd told the doctor, the bank, my family. I kept a notebook hidden in my bedside table. Every evening I would write down what had happened that day. Every interaction. Every theft. Every lie. I wasn't collecting memories. Memories fade, especially when people keep telling you your mind isn't working. I was collecting leverage. I was gathering proof. And with every page I filled, I felt a tiny spark of my old self returning. The woman I used to be. The woman who didn't accept lies or manipulation. The woman who knew how to fight. I kept writing day after day, week after week. Building a case that only I knew about. Waiting for the moment I would need it. A visitor named Barbara came by one afternoon. She was an old friend from my church, and she'd known me for nearly 30 years. We sat in the living room, and Bright had conveniently left to run errands. So we were alone. Barbara looked at me with sad eyes, the way everyone did now. Pity. Concern. The weight of the belief that I was broken. But then she asked me something that no one else had asked in months. She asked it very softly, almost casually. Mercy. If you vanish, who benefits? I looked at her, and something in my chest cracked open. What do you mean? I whispered. I mean, she said carefully, if something happened to you tomorrow, if you were suddenly gone, who would gain from that? Who wants something from you? The answer crashed over me like a wave. Bright. It was always Bright. He would inherit the property building. He would control the house. He would have access to the remaining savings. He would be seen as the dutiful nephew who'd taken care of a sad, lonely old woman. If I died, he gained everything. If I lived, but everyone thought I was mentally unfit, he still controlled everything. Barbara had asked the one question that made everything crystal clear. Barbara, I said, and my voice didn't shake. I know exactly who benefits. I didn't go to lawyers. Not yet. I started talking to people who listen. Real people. People I trusted. Barbara became my confidant, and she helped me understand what was happening. I spoke to my old friend Marcus from the community center. I mentioned things carefully to my neighbor Howard. Not accusations. Just observations. Concerns. Stories. And these people listened. Really listened. They believed me when everyone else had been trained to think I was confused. Bright felt the shift before he understood it. He started being nervous around me. He would call more frequently, checking in. He wanted to know who I'd been talking to. He tried to limit my visitors. He'd listened to my conversations from the next room. He could sense that something had changed. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. He didn't understand what I was doing. He just knew that his plan wasn't proceeding as smoothly as before. And that terrified him. He came to my house in the evening, and his calm facade had cracked. You're turning people against me, he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was angry but also desperate. Desperate people are dangerous people. They're unpredictable. They act without thinking. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard fear in his voice. I stood up slowly and looked at my nephew. This man who had tried to erase me, who had stolen from me, who had tried to paint me as incompetent so he could control everything I'd built. I haven't turned anyone against you, Bright, I said calmly. I've simply told the truth. His face went pale. Barbara knows. Marcus knows. Howard knows. And they all think you're a thief. Fear makes people reckless. They stop thinking clearly. They start making mistakes. They say things they shouldn't say and do things they should never do. Bright was about to become very reckless indeed. Bright called a family meeting. He wanted to clear the air, he said. He wanted to explain things. But what he really wanted was to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of his control. The entire family showed up. His mother, my sister, cousins I hadn't seen in years. And Bright stood in front of everyone and did something that shocked me. He called me confused. He said it right there in front of everyone. Aunt Mercy is clearly losing her mind, he announced. She's making accusations, saying things that never happened, turning people against me. This is exactly what we've been worried about. This is why she needs supervision. He thought public humiliation would work. He thought that if he said it loudly enough in front of enough people, he could still shape the narrative. I stood up slowly. And I spoke clearly, carefully, with every ounce of strength I had left. I told them about the rent money going to Bright's account. I read from my notebook. Dates, amounts, witnesses. I described the lies he'd told to the doctor. I explained how he'd taken my keys, my documents, my independence. I spoke the truth. The silence that followed changed everything. It was the kind of silence where you can hear people's beliefs shifting, where denial becomes impossible. Everyone in that room understood exactly what had been happening. And they finally saw me, really saw me, for the first time in months. When I finished laying out the evidence, I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't express anger or bitterness. Instead I said, "Thank you." Everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Thank you for worrying about me. Thank you for trying to help. Thank you for your concern," I said, looking directly at my sister, at Bright's mother, at each family member who had participated in this conspiracy. My gratitude was honest, but it was also a weapon. Because when you thank people for trying to destroy you, it reveals the truth. It shows everyone in the room that you're not the confused old woman they've been told you are. Shows strength, clarity, intelligence. Their faces fell. Bright's mother looked at her son with horror. My sister covered her mouth. They had been so focused on the narrative they'd built that they hadn't considered. A mentally unfit woman wouldn't speak like this. A confused woman wouldn't remember these details. A helpless woman wouldn't stand with this kind of presence. Gratitude was my sharpest weapon. In the days after the family meeting, Bright's behavior swung completely. He came to my house and wanted to talk. He wanted peace. He wanted understanding. He wanted to be a family again. "I made mistakes," he said. "I was trying to help and I went too far. I'm sorry, Aunt Mercy. Please forgive me." But it was too late for sorry. Desperation is louder than cruelty. His desperation to fix things, to restore his reputation, to salvage his inheritance. It was deafening. It proved everything I'd been saying. An innocent person doesn't suddenly need to apologize for everything. A genuinely concerned family member doesn't suddenly become frantic when caught in lies. I listened to his apologies and said nothing. Bright made me an offer. He said he would take care of me. Truly take care of me. Not steal from me. Not control me. But genuinely look after my needs for the rest of my life. All he wanted was assurance. Assurance that I wouldn't press charges. Assurance that I would let this slide. Assurance that the money he'd stolen could quietly stay where it was. "I just want to know we're okay," he said. "That you don't hate me." I gave him assurance. I told him what he needed to hear. But I was also making calls. I was meeting with lawyers. I was documenting everything with the police. I was preparing the final move. When Bright seemed to relax slightly, believing his apologies had worked, I asked him a simple question. "If I had children," I said, "biological children of my own, would you still want this responsibility? Would you still want to take care of me?" He couldn't answer. His mouth opened, closed. He looked away. Silence stretched between us like a canyon, because we both knew the answer. If I had children, they would inherit. They would question his motives. They would protect my interests. They would own what he was trying to take. But because I was alone, he thought he could take everything. That silence told me everything I needed to know about his true character. Everything I needed to know about his intentions. I didn't make it out of anger. I made my final decision out of absolute clarity. I understood exactly who Bright was. I understood exactly what he'd done. I understood exactly what he would have done if I hadn't found out. And I made a choice that would change everything. My future would not include him. Not in any capacity. Not as a caregiver, not as family, not even in distant relation. He was removed from my life completely and permanently. I didn't fight publicly. I didn't accuse him in angry scenes. I didn't go on social media to expose him. I repositioned. I moved my money to accounts he didn't know about. I transferred the property to a trust with specific instructions. I hired lawyers to draw up documents that protected everything I'd built. I changed my will completely. And I did all of it quietly, methodically, without drama or announcement. Bright never saw it coming. He thought he was winning. He thought his apologies had worked. He thought he could continue taking advantage of my confusion. But while he was relaxing, I was reshaping my entire world. Bright arrived at my house confident. He had a smile on his face. He brought flowers. He was trying so hard to seem like the dutiful nephew again. We sat down. I told him I'd made some changes to my financial arrangements. I watched his face transform. Confusion, then anger, then panic. He left my house without flowers, without smiles, without hope. The truth was about to surface, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The family understood a beautiful truth. Childless didn't mean powerless. It meant unpredictable. It meant that I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't have children waiting for inheritance. I didn't have grandchildren depending on family wealth. I wasn't bound by the expectation that I would eventually hand over everything to the next generation. I was free. And unpredictable terrifies greedy people. It absolutely terrifies them. Because they can't control what they can't predict. Chose my own heirs. I picked people who had been kind to me. I picked organizations that mattered to me. I picked a future that I designed on my terms with my values. I secured my legacy, not for my blood relatives, but for the people and causes I actually cared about. I reclaimed my dignity, took back my life, my home, my money, my independence, my voice. And Bright learned the hardest lesson of all. Never mistake silence for weakness. He had watched me cry quietly and thought I was broken. He had seen me comply and thought I was defeated. He had heard me be quiet and thought I was voiceless. But silence was where I was gathering my strength. And when I finally spoke, everything changed. I am 62 years old. I have no children. I have no grandchildren. I have no one depending on me. And that makes me the most powerful woman in my family. 'Cause I am free to choose my own path. I am free to protect myself. I am free to say no. I am not alone. I am finally, completely, utterly myself. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you have a story to tell, you're not alone here.